this is,
Recording project.
yeah, this is for academic purposes only, or else I'll get sued.
Article 117.
This is, before I'm gonna preface this, this was DOJ's, For the Love of Money. And, my father did an album with, I don't know if anybody remembers Todd Rundgren,
Sure.
but, Todd was from Philly, and, Sigma had just opened, it was around 1968. And we were talking earlier about sound coming from movies and film, and Todd was working in LA. My dad owned the studio, we built the console, and he was the chief engineer, but he asked to assist, and for Todd to bring his engineer in, because my father wanted to learn tricks. And watching other engineers work, you get to, you're not in a vacuum anymore, and you pick up things. So they were doing what's called reverse echo, where you would literally, it's actually harder to do in Pro Tools than on tape. It's a real pain. In fact, you got to invert it and then slide it. It doesn't work like tape. It's not, I can't believe, somebody's going to make money if they actually do an inversion process.
Yeah.
But I haven't found it. I have to do it manually. It's like such a pain. An audio suite. But basically what they would do was, you'd get the signal, and on this, it's the word, the OJ saying, money, 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 money. And what they did was, they flipped the tape upside down, so it's backwards. Then they would send it to a plate, which is a reverberation unit. It's a manual that has springs, and it's a plate, and it's in a box, and there's a transducer on either end. It's like a speaker and a microphone picking up the vibrations in the plate, and that's a plate reverb that you get in boxes today. So they flip the tape around. Track 24, of course, is track 1 now, so you have to make sure what tracks that you're arming on the tape machine. And you would record the reverb from the plate onto the tape while the tape is running backwards. Then you flip it over, now the reverb is ahead of the sound. So it actually happens before the element comes in. My father felt that this song and the words money, 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 there was a precursor to it, like, you know, wanting money, being pulled in by money. So basically, he did this effect, and if you pull up, just solo the vocal, the background vocal, and then the pre-echo background. Just, in fact, just do the vocal first, and we'll put the pre-echo on. And go to the hook. You know, open up the waveform so you can find where the hook's at. The mains aren't on somehow. All right, now go back
You want just a
and,
reverb
and put the pre-verb on.
with both.
Alone. Crank it up a little bit. Now put them both on. And balance it out. You're an engineer. Balance it out where you feel it.
Money, 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 money. Money, 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 money.
Push it up. Don't be afraid.
Money, 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 money. Money, 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 money. Money, 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 money.
That became part of the signature of that song.
Money, 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 money.
And then I just did, they're doing a documentary on my father in the studio because of what the innovations they put together. Because back in the day, there was Motown, there was Sigma Sound, there was Muscle Shoals, and a few studios, and there's a book out called Temples of Sound. And the minute you put a record on, you could tell if it was Motown, you could tell the Sigma sound, because people worked in vacuums. My father built the room, he built the HVAC system, he built the console, and the same thing, he had a guy in another city that was his clone that at Motown who they built their own consoles, you know, they had their own rooms, and then there were the musicians that populated those rooms, and it wasn't like today where we were talking earlier, McDonald's is predictable mediocrity. And people with Pro Tools and people that learn how to mix online, it's predictable mediocrity. That's why I put on older songs that were done in studios that people could kind of say, oh, that's Olympic Studios in England. I mean, I got the pleasure of working at the Townhouse where Zeppelin recorded. It was a Helios console, beautiful wood floors. I mean, the room was incredible. The sound was beautiful. And you could imagine being there with, you know, with Zeppelin, you know, playing. And the funny thing is that, not to digress, but I have people that go, I want the Bonham drum sound. And I'm like, no, you don't. And then I have to put the record on because they put two U-87s up about 12 feet in the air and it sounds like a wash. What they really wanted is, I want like a kick drum that's low, but I feel the beater, and I want the toms to really bring out and slap. And if you listen to Zeppelin records, especially the first two, which are really everything's like ambient and big and fat, and there's no attack on those drums. It's just a wash, you know. But people will come in and say that, and then I have to go to YouTube and pull up a video of the song and go, "That's what you want," and then they go, "No." And I go, "You're talking about Bonham's feel. You're not talking about the drum sound, man. And you got to play that." You know? So,
Except for In Through the Outdoor, and make that a cut, don't edit
right. The other thing that was innovative on this is, does anybody know what flanging is?
It's when you put your finger on the flange of the reel to.
There you go.
Well, you take a copy of it usually, right?
You have two copies.
Two copies.
You start them at the same time, and you put your finger on, and
And
you
you get
press and release, and what happens?
the signals go in and out of phase with each other.
Right. Phase modulation, which you can, there's a plug-in where you can do that. In fact, if you have they make things easy for you, but with any delay, if you have a delay plug-in, and if it has any sort of time movement, if you move within 2 or less, usually less than 2 milliseconds time, you get down to microsecond times. But if you work and you vary the time between 0 and a microsecond or 2 microseconds, up to a millisecond or 2, you get varying degrees, which I have a little video that I'm going to put on after the, well, not the video, we'll see if the session comes up, but I want you to go to the bass. What they did was, after flangers, they actually came out with a digital device. But the modulation was manual. They still didn't have moving modulation. So, in fact, it was an analog device. It was pre-digital. And the assistant had to sit there and vary the time to make the phasing. In the documentary that's coming out, I went to the Hooters studio, and Anthony Jackson was the bass player, and we recreated what he did. But on this is Anthony Jackson, and the assistant was basically sitting there through the whole song, making the bass phase. So solo up the bass track if you could. This is also when people could play. Listen to his articulation. I mean, do you see how perfect? I mean, it's not a hard line, but you hear it sounds like a machine. I mean, that sounds looped. That's how good these cats are. Put a little mix on, man. Let me read that. See, you're live. live sound guy. Us studio cats have the faders, start with the faders down. Live guys have the faders up. Let me give you a suggestion. Where are the drums? I think on this
I'm
one,
trying to find them.
I think they're right after.
Well, I've almost.
There's you got the snare, but there should be kick, snare, and drums. It's all the tracks. Just to get them.
You guys remember last
Now,
week?
you hear the bleed? Listen.
Oh, wow.
Now, another misnomer. That's a ribbon microphone. It's a BK5. It can take 135 dB of SPL. I forget what band, a rock band, I use them on guitar amps and kick drums, but a rock band rented 5 of them, and it's an RCA ribbon, and basically most people will tell you, no, ribbons can't handle high SPL. Wrong, you gotta read, and there's a ball that fits over it, and people think that ball is what makes it handle the SPL. That ball is a pop filter. On Gear Sluts, people were paying $500 for the ball. I said, I'll get a soft ball and I'll get radiator aluminum and I'll hammer it. I'm not gonna pay $500. I paid $500 for my mic. But basically the blast filter is cotton wadding between the magnets where the filter is.
Right.
It's not in that head unit. So, again, I mentioned this before, on Gear Sluts, people know a little and they get into trouble. So if you go on there for advice, watch the people that people listen to and not some of the crazy stuff that people espouse. So that's a RCA UK5.
Did you engineer this session?
My father did this. Yeah, I was still in grade school.
Well, a lot of jazz records, like audiophile grade, Manfred Eichen and stuff, a lot of the kick drums for the jazz drummers are done with, maybe 3 feet out.
Oh yeah.
Like a Byron.
You listen to Van Gelder stuff,
Yeah.
I mean, and he's a fantastic engineer, but if you really listen, it's muddy, distant, I mean, it's not Creed Taylor or CTI. I mean, if you listen to CTI jazz records from the 70s, and you listen to Van Gelder, they're like worlds apart. But Van Gelder got to work with Coltrane and Elvin and, so. As you put each track on, like kick drum solo, the snare. Snare is third track. C snare. This might be the one where the snare broke, the wire broke.
I've got.
It says overdub, doesn't it?
How many of you
It
guys
did,
ever
the wire
saw
did
this
break.
process before?
Bring the volume a
Mixing.
little bit.
No? Go. Probably good.
Pretty dry.
Okay,
no,
now this.
I'm hearing some bleed in there.
Yeah, you do bleed. Now, stop the tape. Stop the tape. Stop playback. What happened, I think, because it says overdub, I didn't know if it was this song or not, but at least one of the songs, the snare wire broke, and the producer was like, that's the take. And my father was like, the wire broke. All of a sudden the snare sounds dead, because without the wire, you don't get that little sparkle out of the snare. So what he did was he went into the studio, he got a snare, and he put a speaker and he put an oscillator on it until the snare wires vibrated. He recorded that, put the tone out of phase so that it canceled, and all you have left is wires vibrating. He took those vibrating wires, put that tape up, put the snare up where the wires broke, mixed them together and recorded it on a track, and the snare wires back because he used a gate to open up the wire and then close to clamp down, and it sounds like a snare with the snare wire, but the wire broke. So it's being creative, again, like you gotta think outside of the box. And then after he did that, he said, wow, I can do that with a shaker. So we had a shaker loop and we had a wire loop, because in the disco days, they used to tighten up the drum was so dry, like somebody said, very dry snare. That was that sound for that era. They wanted that tight, cracked, dry sound, but sometimes they go overboard. So we had a snare wire loop that we would play, and we had a shaker loop, and we would use a gate, which basically uses you can trigger a gate. So you would use the source, which was the snare, use that to open up the gate. A gate is like a gate or a door. It closes and it opens, and there's a threshold. And basically, he set the threshold, used the trigger from the snare to open up the gate, which was passing the snare wire sound. So it would open with the snare and then close whenever he set the release. So it could like sizzle or be as tight as he wanted. You have total control over that, you know. So.
Did you ever do that with cowbell?
But using things like that in tools, I mean, people furthered that. And when I started out doing dance mixes, first gospel, because, you know, gospel you can get away with anything. I mean, I didn't know I thought a deep C note was actually a note, and it's like, no, the note's so bad you want to throw it deep into the C. It took me about 5 sessions to understand what a deep C was. But I moved to dance music in the 80s, and we used to actually use, gate can be what's called a downward expander. Are you familiar? Because you're a techie. And we would, because we wanted the track to pump to the kick, snare, and hi-hat, I would get the kick, snare, and sometimes the hat, sum them together, take the output of that sum, and run that as the trigger input, and push my keyboards down so the keyboards would pump to the groove. Only with about 3 dB of downward expansion. But it would push the drums out forward, and it would make the rhythm of the keyboards and other instruments that I would use to trigger that to almost like kind of pump to the beat a little bit. And you would perceive, you wouldn't be able to pull it out, but you felt it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was one of the tricks in the arsenal that we used to use back in the day.
Like
You know,
an inverse
so-
side chain.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah. So, I
Were
mean,
you
there's,
parallel with optos also, or no? Optical compressors?
no, and, you know, and that's the other thing, in the whole building, because now you know, with digital, I put peak limiters, I mean, because the loudness stuff is a pain. I'm lucky most of my clients, there's a wall, there's a 2 to 3 dB wall where you can destroy a song. I don't go there.
Right.
Other people go for level, and if you listen today, there's so much music where you can actually hear digital distortion. I mean, and they don't care. And it's like, to me, it's like, that's what the volume control is for in your home stereo. Why are you making toothpaste? You'll never hear like that King Crimson song, the dynamics in that's gone. I mean, very few people will do that today, and it's sad, because what does it mean? Are you serving music by pushing it up and making it as loud as it can be? I mean, it makes no logical sense to me. I think it's a real shame for our industry. A lot of engineers fought against it, and unfortunately, record labels, the ideology is louder is better. And it started with, I'll tell you, the first album, this was vinyl, was Aerosmith, Pump. And there's a piano up front, and then you hear like Marshalls come in, and the piano is as loud as the Marshalls. Well, in a real situation, a piano is not as loud as somebody with 200-watt Marshall stacks. But Ludwig and those guys, they wanted their record louder than everybody else, so they just squashed the hell out of it, and you take bottom out, because in the analog world, bottom is energy and space. So add the 3K, add the frequencies that are in your your Fletcher-Munson curve of sensitivity of hearing, crush and add mid-range, and you get loud. And unfortunately, that's where we're at. And I think it's up to people. Didn't Metallica came out with an album?
Yeah,
It was
terrible.
so crushed
Which
that the
one?
fans actually said, this stinks, and they went in and they remastered it without the compression.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is fantastic. Like, the fans actually
Yeah.
care, except that was one album.
Yeah.
And I thought that it would start the ball rolling, but it didn't. But I was like really impressed. I mean, there was a big article on it and everything else. I don't remember the album, but it was so squashed.
Death Magnetic.
Was that
the
it?
most recent one. Yeah, and they actually to make the Guitar Hero video game, put it in that format, they took all the stems and remixed it, so a lot of people were buying the video game.
Okay,
soundtrack.
right.
Just
Yeah, I
to-
knew there was a backstory to that.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I mean, and well, I think it was good, you know, that people, you know, you had those two media that people could really see the difference between them, you know.
We
Sounds
fought
like
that
there was
so
an
much.
accounting scheme there.
Pardon me? What?
Sounds like there was a good marketing scheme there.
That's probably right.
Somebody wanted to sell some Guitar Heroes.
Right.
Yes, they did.
Big inside, though.
No, I mean, it really is a shame though. I mean,
A&R
Unique
and
Ouija
record
thing.
companies, they definitely contribute to the loudness wars radio stations. Whatever station was louder, that drove it too, you know?
well, this is the other thing is I mean, when you listen on the radio, which I haven't listened to the radio in years. I got a thumb drive in my car, and I have, unfortunately, I won't play full waves. I run 320, I run 320 kilobits a second, MP3 files, but radio stations have what's called an optimod. You're familiar with them, right? You've heard of an optimod? And it's a multi-band EQ compressor. So if you listen to, if you're listening to WXPN,
Right.
they have it set on soft mode.
Right.
If you listen to Jimi Hendrix on XPN and then you listen to him on MMR or whatever others, no, I don't listen to, like I said, I don't listen to the radio anymore. The album sounds totally different because each station has its own flavor, and that's set up by this compression EQ algorithm that has multiple presets, and then you can go in and create your own preset and sound. But every radio station actually has a vibe. Like R&B stations pump the bottom up on everything.
Yep.
And what they do is, think about, you heard those three songs and how different they were? People would be going and changing, like if I was listening to Queensryche, I would be adding bottom. If I was listening to the other song, I'd be adding mid-range. So instead of you doing that, they have a piece of gear that analyzes each song as it's going in, makes corrective measures, so when you're listening from song to song, the variation isn't as great as it would be. So when you're listening to the radio, you're not really listening to the guy's mix.
We use Frank Fode's Omnia processor. So, I mean, that's always the big challenge when you're doing a live broadcast, because what you're sending, you know, from your stereo bus to the broadcast chain, you're really not capable of hearing it, what it's going to sound like in somebody's car, you know. So you kind of have to send your mix thinking that the Omnia is gonna master it for you, you know. So.
Well, when I did a bunch of live radio concerts, I did the Stray Cats, the Smithereens, which are from this area. I did David Bowie, which was an abortion because they had a rider and they wanted hypercardioid mics, which you don't put on a guitar and a vocal because people move their head, you know. And then their microphones broke during the show, which was terrible. Yeah, Bowie was very kind to me because, you know, I assisted on Young Americans album, which was the the one that broke Bowie. It was his first gold record. I was a gopher. I wasn't even an assistant. I just got out of high school. It was the summer of '74. And it was 97, and Bowie came in with Niles Cabral, or I forget the name of his guitar player. Reese Cabral. Yeah. And the rider said, hypercardioid mics. I'm going, why would you use a hypercardioid mic? And the microphones broke because they weren't our mics. And the first thing I did was, I was like, you know, you're on air, it's live. I don't like live sound. I like being in the studio because if something breaks, you go, stop the clock on the bill and let's find out what's wrong. With live, you can't do
Time
that.
is your friend.
Yeah, right. So I was like, swap out the whole chain. New cable, channel input, everything, except the mics because they were rented.
Yeah.
Well, it wound up that the mics were bad. So in and out of the show, and then them moving back and forth, and you can't go, oh, you know, you can't go to the radio audience and go, oh, I'm really sorry, they made me use a hypercardioid mic, and that's why you hear his voice 1 second, and when he goes off the mic, you don't hear him. I had to like sit there and just, with sweat pouring down my head, and feeling like a total jackass. And I called people in other cities and I go, what did you do? And they go, I looked at that rider and I threw it away. And I go, I thought that you're supposed to follow the rider. I go, I wasn't going to say what mics to use. And just out of interest, if you were going to cut, because you engineer, you could probably help these people. I want to see if you know your stuff. If you're cutting vocals in an acoustic guitar, how would you mic it?
For a live setting,
No, for a recording.
for recording, I'm
Yeah.
recording them simultaneously.
The guy singing and playing guitar, how would you do it?
I would.
To get the most ability to control the guitar and the mic and the vocal.
I would use cardioid on the vocal and cardioid pointed at the 12th fret.
2 figure-8s.
Okay, alright.
Think about it.
Yeah.
When I record guitar and vocal, if you put a figure-8 here with the capsule with one end of the 8
You're not
here up top, that's where the void is. And if you do the same on the vocal, down below is where the void is.
Right.
So you actually, you're getting about 20 to 30 dB of null from the figure-8 pattern. So use, you know, when you learn things, like there's a reason why there's a figure-8 microphone. You have to, you know, and they're very simple tools, but you got to think through when to use them and why to use them. And that figure-8 is fantastic for that because the side rejection is amazing.
Yep.
It's about 30 dB side
That's
rejection.
why they're good spot mics also.
Right. You just have to worry, like in that situation, you have to be in a decent room because you're picking up the back too.
And where your wedges are, where your monitor wedges, you know,
Right.
are positioned.
Now, Tony Visconti, when we did, another thing is, we want to go, again, I don't have my watch with me, I want to make sure that
We got 25.
we got 25 minutes, 30 minutes. Go to the phone, we were going to put a mix up, but let me just put that mix up real quick.
You got
Is
some
it
great
on?
mixes
You
you
can
brought.
put that back up.
We can
I always
just-
start with the kick drum, so, I mean, usually, so.
Are we in the right thing?
We want to hear all the
Okay,
mixes.
those things. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
play.
The Beatles and Queen.
He's got Queen?
Where's Pam Pop, please?
Uh,
Solo, up hands for her.
oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Why is this?
That's, don't worry about it.
Oh. Okay. Oh, that's the overdub, okay. So this must be drums overhead. Oh, he plays the drums?
Yeah, what you have 2 bass drums and then you have one with a FX and one with.
Wow.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure what
So that's a bass on the drums.
what's the next
Boy, my father was creative with this.
one. There it is.
Well, I'm still getting, these pan ponts aren't working. So I guess I have to pan from here. The panning isn't working.
Hold up, let me
It's like playing like,
Is there like a mono lock or something or what?
no, we're in. Wait. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
you have it coming back in the stereo?
Well, I was turning the fan ponts.
Oh wait,
Like,
we have these.
Throw your mixer on there, so
well then, can you fan from the? ban from the program. Can you do that? I mean, can you just put a version on it?
I mean,
You know another word?
Flip it over. There, stop for a second. Flip it over, make sure you're coming in.
Now go back to the banners. Okay. Well, look at the latency. And what we used to do is minus 3 dB was your kick drum in the analog days. Where's the bass? 7.
Bass.
8. Now, when they ran out of tracks, they had to blend things together. So this is the piano and vibes together. Here.
What's triggering the compression? The kick.
Is this recorded on the Neve?
No, this was the Electrodyne. This is the console my dad built. Okay.
That looks
and
like
then-
that's like the foundation.
I got these.
He invented disco with this song.
Probably.
Well, no, we did Disco Inferno. Here's Eddie. Wait, which track is this?
Brother, save your soul,
Lead vocal.
save your soul. Don't sell
Listen to
it
his foot.
You know.
for that mean, 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 mean green.
U87.
You
I make people take their jewelry off and empty their pockets. Do you hear the jingling? It drives me nuts.
I keep it telling you.
That's Walt. They would put
'Cause it'll keep
287s.
on.
They would put 287s back to back, like spread like this, cardioid, so rear rejection. And Eddie and Walt would look at each other and sing, so they would know when they were going, who was going to trade off on the vocals, because they worked together so much. So they didn't record separately, so it was really hard for the engineer because you had to run, which is a trick. I'm going to put a little more of that vocal up. Where was
What
tracks?
distance were they like?
That's
Almighty dollar,
These are the backgrounds. Where's the?
change it.
vocals, right?
Don't do it, keep on. Yeah. Keep it telling you. Don't let money change you. Almighty dollar.
You can hear the compression.
People, don't let money change you. Almighty dollar.
So basically, the two bus is so, this board is so wild. I wanted to find one more thing in here. Okay, was there a stereo return?
Why would they have needed to double up on tracks if it only uses 18 in the project?
Oh,
I have a
what-
feeling.
Oh, you're looking.
Yeah,
No,
back.
the stereo. This is
The stereo, yeah. There were basically automation back then, which was Allison Research's memories. You would need 2 tracks, an A and a B track, separated by an empty space so that there was no overlap from the heads on the tape recorder. So you'd have track 24 and track 22 would be your A and B code tracks. So you would write a pass, then you'd make changes, and when you made the changes, track A would be recorded to track B. Then when you made changes again, track B would go to track A, and back and forth. Well, what would happen is after a 10-hour mix, there'd be a latency, so engineers had to actually do their rides ahead of the ride, so by the end of the session, they would fall into place. There was so much stuff that had to go on in your head back in the day that you take for granted now. Now you just put right in on your computer and you write automation. You can draw it, you can use a fader, you can sit there and draw it, you can put your cursor and move things up and down, and you can grab stuff. When automation originally started, because we had the first operational automation system in the world, basically it was flipping back between an A and B channel.
With VCA automation.
VCA, which to me VCAs are the kiss of death.
Yeah.
In fact, that's why on the Neve, you could move the VCAs, you could flip the VCAs from the monitor faders to the tracking faders. I always tracked and mixed using motorized faders, and I used the board as an in-out console, not in-line, which you guys don't have to worry about today. So.
What about on the MCI? Did you use the?
The VCAs they were locked in, and basically I have the original Electrodyne modules that Bowie and this album was cut on, and there's VCAs in there, and basically the 88-year-old guy that I talked to him 10 years ago, so he's either 98 or dead, but 10 years ago when I was trying to restore the modules, and he goes, I would, like a typical tech guy, why would you use that crap? Those VCAs stunk, and the op amps were first generation operational amplifiers. Just had come out, like they were the early op amps, and he was on the phone like razzing me. Who would want that? And I go, people are into like vintage stuff today, and you name records, and there's a cachet value. He goes, the crap, and I go, yeah, because Mark is the guy that turned me on to these. We were at a friend's studio, and there was the Avalon came out. When Pro Tools came out, you didn't need a console, so people started selling pieces like preamps as separate entities. And Wald had a 737, which to me that's a boat anchor. There's no transient response, and so he had that, and they had a Command 24 or Control 24, whatever it was. It was a Pro Digidesign console with preamps. And I was just going, I had just learned Pro Tools, and I'm going, God, Pro Tools sucks. But really, what was sucking was the preamps. Mark brought in, you had the HP4. It was four channels. Yeah. Mark brought in four channels.
No, I brought in my eights.
Yeah. I think he brought, and we cut a drum kit, and we molted. I had molted stuff out. Molting is where you take one signal and you can make two, going through a passive molt on your patch bay. So I wanted to know what was going on. I'm going, this sounds like crap. I was doing that delayed attack thing with a compressor to try to put front end on my kick and snare because the transient was like rolled off. Yeah. And I'm going, that's Pro Tools. Well, it wasn't. We molted everything out, and you could actually see, because a waveform window is a waveform window, don't go by it, but you could actually see like a 2-pixel spike with the Millennia, and the attack was amazing, and I'm going, all this time I thought it was Pro Tools, man, and you just have crappy preamps. And it really, these are technically speaking, on the tech side wise, the perfect preamplifier is aligned with gain. That's what they're trying to do. Right. Today, like people have Neves and all this other stuff. Neves have a lot of iron and transformers in them. They have a warm, fat sound. You know, the SSL is kind of brittle. There's different flavors, and people buy preamps for that. But if you're actually looking for something that's the closest thing to align with gain, most orchestral work is done with Millennias. I mean, I think almost all orchestral work, and that's the guy, my buddy works with him. He used to work at Lexicon, but they're the same people that did stuff at Lexicon or whatever. But if you flip to some of the pictures, go to the string gate.
Yeah.
This was, when you notice this, I want you to see something and see who picks up on this. It should say strings.
Oh yeah.
And I'm even going to give you a hint. What don't you see in the picture? So say strings. You can just
Oh,
open
there
it
it
up.
is.
No,
I throw it up on the big monitor.
go up.
Oh, damn it.
Keep on going. We'll get to that. Oh, yeah, right there. No, there you go. What don't you see? Can you put that up on the
for
big
sure.
screen? What don't you see in this picture? Come on, guys. Don't cheat, Mark. Nobody can tell. What are they listening to?
Themselves.
Where are their headphones?
They're listening to themselves. They got monitors on the floor.
This was another trick that we did at Sigma.
What's plugged in?
We had
Oh,
speakers.
you got the noise up there.
Well, no, not the noise. There's speakers that that are out of your line of sight. But what we did was, we had speakers with a switch on them. So they played the music, and the string players. I mean, we had one-sided headphones, but string players generally don't like to wear headphones. Switch the speakers out of phase. Then when they doubled the strings, as long as you kept the volume exactly the same, which you didn't touch the volume to the string to this, we taped that off.
Right.
They would completely phase invert, and you'd have strings, but none of the music they were listening to.
Right.
So that's why there's no headphones on them.
So it's specifically for doubling.
Because we usually double the strings. That session. That was 4. I think I did that session. That was 4, and there was horns in the back.
If
It
you
was
just
4, 2. It was 8 violins, 2 viola, 2 cello, and there was an upright on that. That might have been for Patty. I'm not sure. But we just used boxes. So again, when you learn things in your classes about phase and phase inversion and this and that, there's actually practical applications for them. And one of them was like, in this instance, you saved 12 pairs of headphones just for the string players alone, and all the cabling and wires and all the other mess. Now, sometimes they did use phones, sometimes they didn't. It all depended on who the arranger was and the producer. They would kind of dictate. Do you want to use speakers, or do you want to use phones? And you ask those questions up front. Go to the Ed Sullivan building picture.
Yellow
One above Whitney
mixing headphone,
This-
discrete headphone mixes for all those string players is a very dynamic and challenging job. Everybody wants something different.
This is, you can tell, Kate and Allie and Jane Curtin were, I guess, Saturday Night Live. This is the Ed Sullivan Theater. We had 2 floors in the Ed Sullivan building. They built our Neve console. It's 53rd and Broadway. In fact, if you ever see the movie Taxi Driver, the phone booth there, where he's in the phone booth, is right on the corner of 53rd and Broadway, because they were filming that movie. I think we were operating in that building then. And the SSS, Sigma Sound, those 3 guys are our tech guys that rebuilt that Neve. There were only 3 in the world that had a 52 input mainframe, and that was taken out. Let's go up. There should be pictures of the crane. Scroll up here. This came down from the 8th floor of the Ed Sullivan building where it was made. So I guess it's up further. I thought I had pictures of that. I didn't put it in. It's in studio pictures in here, but we don't have to go through that. Below the picture below that over here, that's we did Whitney Houston's album, and the reason I brought this picture in is because Michael Masser, on Whitney's big album, her big hit album, I forget what it was, a massive selling album, there were 12 reels, 12 24-track reels of her vocals for one song. And the producer actually went through, you're talking 12 times 22 vocal takes that he went through and picked words out, because my father and I are from the school of sing it, do it, be it, done. And Michael Masser basically took every word and created the song from over 100 takes that Whitney sang, and Whitney's a great singer, because in 30 some years of doing music, I only left one session, and that was, anybody into James Bond films?
Sure.
You remember Sheena Easton did For Your Eyes Only? I remember, everybody remembers that song, it's pretty old, but I figure if you're a Bond fan, does anybody have any gum or anything?
Yeah.
My mouth is so dry, it's like, it's killing me.
Water for it also.
But I was working with Sheena, and she made me do 8 tracks. Like, she sang two words at a time, and then wanted to go on a second track and sing 2 words. And she did this 8 times. Then it was about 8 hours later that we got to the song, and she didn't want to hear the preceding 2 lines, so I had to mute to her headphones the preceding 2 lines. Then she would sing the next 2 lines 8 times till the song was done. She came in to the control room with me. Excuse me. She came into the control room with me, and she started putting numbers over the lyric sheet. And when she got to take the B from track 2 and the 4 from track 6, in the studio you do whatever, you work, you're a servant, it's a service industry. It's the only time in my whole life I turned on all 8 tracks. They were so close that she was phasing, which if you double, I've only had it happen to 2 singers where we did background vocals, and basically you'll do a unison, a third, a fifth is like an R&B type thing. And I was cutting Tina Marie, and she sang at the same level, the same timing, and the same pitch, because that's the only way you could phase vocally. You do 4 tracks, they sounded smaller than 1. I actually had to put a delay on, a digital delay to make it sound like stacked vocals, because she was that good. So I turned 8 tracks of Sheena on, and she's phasing. And I go, "You're phasing. I don't know what you're hearing." And she goes, "Well, Michael Masser, because of Whitney's album, does it that way." And I looked at my producer, and he was in awe of Sheena Easton, and he didn't say anything. So the next night, I called in, and I said, "I can't work with her. Find somebody else." And I came in, and I mixed the project, but I didn't do any of her vocals. Because my producer didn't stick up for me. He had to hear the fact that she was singing perfectly and not changing anything. Like if the performance was a little different, I could see it and I could understand it. But it was the exact same performance down to where you could hear her voice, her sound phase, because her intonation, her timing, and the level in which she sang were exact. And because somebody else did 100 and some tracks with Whitney, and that's why she's in that picture. We can go through above the Ed Sullivan.
And Mike, I'll just interrupt and say it's nearly 6
Okay.
o'clock.
All right.
So if anyone has any questions or anything that Mike could explain further, or anything you'd like to ask, now's your chance.
Yeah, yes. This is the board Madonna did her first 2 albums on. That's an MCI 500 series up in our studio, the studios we had in New York. But are there any questions, or you guys have been pretty quiet?
Yeah, great.
What is transience? I've heard you mention that a couple times.
A transient is the initial attack on a waveform. Generally, a waveform or a sound will have an attack, a sustain, and a decay. And if you look at the controls on most compressors or limiters, you'll see attack and release parameters. There is also a sustain in there, you know, and some compressors will have that. But transient is that initial hit. So like on a kick drum, it's the beater. On a snare, it's when the stick hits the snare. On a piano, it's when the hammer is hit. That's where the transient is. And that's the wall that you fight against at your digital 0 dBFS full scale
You see your amplitude,
recording.
the waveform and your amplitude.
I actually have pictures of all that, so that's why I brought extra stuff in. So, but that is a good question.
Would you guys join me and give you Mike a round of applause for that?
I thought I wouldn't have enough, I thought I'd have too much time, and I actually didn't have enough time, so.
So it is.
I hope you guys learned, got something out of this, and you can apply it to your academic stuff. Yeah. It was a very nice meeting you all.
Thank you.
And we'll stick around, we're doing open studio night for a couple of hours now, so you guys can stick around if you wish.
What's the open studio thing?
It's just about 4 hours. We allow any students to come in and record.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah. We want to give them the exposure of the facility and, the opportunity to experiment.
You see me with digital consoles, I'm void, man. I mean,
Yeah, well,
It's a different medium, digital.
it is different. I mean, this is a flexible board for like a small room like this.
Right.
Um,
You can flip to monitors and all that other stuff. It has
Well,
little
it's got
page scrolling
the
functions.
computer insert patching too, so you can just set up all your patches and then
Yeah.
tell
For those who
it
swiped
where
in,
what you want to insert
If
on
you,
one channel.
if you swipe
Yeah,
in,
if you
you'll
go
get
into
a,
like.
We had a
email link at
Behringer
some point
board,
to
and
do a
I hooked
survey.
up all the Pro
We'd
Tools
be grateful
plugins
for
to
your
this
feedback.
Behringer live
The-
board.
the X
And he had
yeah.
and the guy had an iPad, and I was going to do sound for my friend, and the year before was an
Thanks for
analog
being
board. And I saw that, and I go, no, I'll just tell you what to EQ, and bring the levels up, I'm not touching it.
I'm not, I mean, it works,
Oh,
but.
Dom, before Chris runs out, you want me to make